Thank you, Andrew and Michelle. Well, good morning, Grace, and Happy New Year. Also known as the day of horribly mismanaged expectations, right? I mean, think about this thing we do to ourselves every year, right? We sit there on New Year's Day, New Year's Eve, and we think about the past 365 days and full of regret, all the things, and we don't focus on the good things, right? We think about all the things we wish we had done better, the things we wish we wouldn't have eaten, the things that we wish that we wouldn't have said, and we think about a whole 365 days of regret. And then right there in the middle, then we look forward 365 more days with a sort of hopeful anxiety about, am I gonna maybe not be that person over here? And so we sit there in this one kind of 24 to 36 hour period with a whole year's worth of regret, a whole year's worth of hopeful anxiety, and we place the entire weight of that on this one day every year. It's a weird thing that we do, but the reason why we do it is because we want something more. We want to take this moment and draw sort of a line in the sand and say, okay, all right, it's time to start over. It's time to do something fresh, something new. And our tradition in our family, my wife and I and our kids, on New Year's Eve, we'll stay up late, we'll watch the ball drop, we'll have, we always stay at our house because going anywhere on New Year's Eve is just a crazy idea to me. But we'll stay in our house and we usually have friends over and we'll just have a really good time. Well, that's what we usually do. And then the next morning, we'll wake up and we get up before the kids do, and my wife and I will go kind of to our kind of quiet places, and both of us will reflect on the previous year, not on the regrets, but on the things that we're grateful for. We'll write in our journals, and I write down all the books that I read and sort of think about the lessons I learned from them. And I go through all my pictures in my phone and think about all the places I've been and all the things I've been able to do and all the people I've been able to be with. And I'll write down those experiences. And then from that place of gratitude, then I'll start thinking, well, what do I want to do this year, right? That's what we usually do. This year was a little different. So about 8 o'clock, my wife looks at me on New Year's Eve and she says, I'm tired. I'm gonna go to bed. And I was like, okay, all right. I didn't say this in the earlier service, but within about an hour of that, my youngest daughter started throwing up, that was exciting. Another New Year's Eve surprise. So once we kind of got my daughter's stomach settled, my wife was fast asleep. We're there at about, getting close to East Coast New Year's, and our tradition in our house is to, we watch Anderson Cooper. He's a lovely fellow. He's charming. He says funny things. I like Anderson Cooper. And so we'll usually watch the kind of CNN version of the, ringing in the New Year. After Dick Clark died, we were on this ship lost at sea for years, not knowing what to do. But then we kind of found our new tradition. And so we're watching that, and my youngest daughter, Nora, my son, Patrick, they're there. My oldest daughter's in California because she marched in the Rose Bowl on New Year's Day, which was really cool, but just my younger two kids. And we're watching, we flip it on, and there's Anderson, and about 3 minutes in, I realized that this was like a freshman guy at his first fraternity party. It was sloppy, okay? It was a really sloppy show, so I was like, okay, this isn't really kid-friendly. So we kind of flipped around. We end up seeing the ball drop. That was cool. Yay, New Year's. Everybody's kind of, all lang syne. And the ball drops. I don't know if you noticed this. The little fireworks go off the side of it. It says 2022. Well, about 30 seconds after the ball dropped, the whole tower that the ball was on went black. The power went out. I don't know what happened. But I just sat there and went, oh gosh, here we go again. I was on Twitter a little later, and one of my friends put, welcome to year 3 of 2020. I thought, oh my gosh, let's hope not. But, okay, so, all right, that's fine. I fell asleep on the couch watching The Office. Fantastic New Year's Eve. Wake up early the next morning because I'm not going to let it define me, right? So I wake up early the next morning, start writing in my journal, doing the things that I usually do and enjoying the morning. And my wife says, hey, why don't we go to my grandparents' house? Her grandparents both passed away over the past year. And why don't we look at that bed, okay? They had this beautiful bed, and it had been given to us if we wanted it to replace our bed. I didn't really want to replace my bed, but whatever, right? You go along with things sometimes. And so I'm like, all right, fine. So we go over there, and we look at it. It really is a beautiful bed. And I'm like, okay, whatever. It's a bed. It's a bed frame, whatever. So we kind of disassemble it. We get it put into the car. Had to take all the parts and make sure all the screws are there. We put it into the car. Of course, it's 100 degrees because that's what we do in Alabama at Christmas now. So we get in the car, we drive home. We pull in the driveway, go into our room, and disassemble our bed. Take the box spring, take the mattress, disassemble the whole giant, apparatus. Realize how absolutely disgusting we are as humans once you see underneath the bed. And you're like, how did I lose that much flesh? Because it's just like dust everywhere. We clean all that up, my eyes are watering, allergies are going crazy. We take that bed out, load it into my car, take the new bed, bring it inside, spend the next, 45 minutes, an hour putting it all together, getting it all, get the box springs, bring them in, we lift it up, put it on. About that much difference. We've been told our whole lives it was a queen bed. It wasn't. It was like a big full, okay? So we had a decision to make. First, there was no decisions. I just sulked around the house for probably 20 minutes because I just didn't want to be angry on New Year's Day, so I walked around pouting, okay? So I go back in there, and we have a decision to make. Do we disassemble this whole bed again, bring in our old bed, which I was kind of, at that point, I was like, oh, maybe we get a new bed. Do we order a new bed on Amazon that's going to be here on Tuesday, or do we just cut our losses and buy a new mattress, right? Like all these decisions are happening. Well, we decided to go the financially fiscal route, the financially responsible route, and disassemble the whole bed again, take it, put it into another room, go back out to my car, take the bed that's been completely disassembled back out of my car, bring it back. Our neighbors I don't know what our neighbors think about us. Like 6 different times we're going back and forth bringing beds in. Like I'm not sure what they think we do in our house, but they think we have a lot of beds apparently. Bring it back in, reassemble it, put the thing on. 6 hours later, okay, what's usually a really peaceful, reflective day, 6 hours later, I finally realized, oh my gosh, it's dinner time, and I haven't started cooking collard greens, black-eyed peas, and pork chops, and cornbread. And, if you don't do that in the South, it's gonna be bad, whatever bad means now, right? So it was not a great New Year. It was weird. It was not a lot of fun. And as I think about it, it's funny because if that would have happened on February 1st instead of January 1st, it would have just been a weird Saturday. But because it happened on January 1st, the day of ridiculous expectation, it felt like the whole world was spiraling into the abyss. I don't know if you have those kinds of feelings sometimes, but I think it's because New Year's is supposed to be a time of new beginning and a fresh start. And it's a time where we have the opportunity to do something new. Another way to put it is that we're all trying to chase the good life, right? We use New Year's Day as sort of a line in the sand because we want our lives to be better. We want to be better. We want to do better in this world and be better to our families and be better to our friends and maybe even be better to our enemies. And we want to be good. And so New Year's represents almost the starting line of chasing that good life. And here's the thing, Jesus got that, okay? Jesus understood that that we as humans want to live a better life. We want to do better. We want to do good. And he talks about that. And if you have your Bibles, you can flip with me to the book of John. It's the book of John, chapter 10. It's a really well-known passage, especially the verse I'm going to read. But John 10:10 says this, I have come to give you life and life more abundantly. Another way to say it, the way you see on your screen, is I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. That's John 10:10. When we think about this idea of abundant life, that's not something that's really talked about outside of church a whole lot. That's not a phrase that you're going to hear probably at your job. There are some ways of translating that might make it a little more digestible. One is to have more life, to have a fuller life, a real life, or maybe even a better translation is to have a good life, a capital G, good life. You see, the context for that passage is this. Jesus has been working a metaphor there in John chapter 10. He's been working a metaphor of him being the shepherd and us being the sheep. And so he's using this metaphor to talk about our relationship with him. He's talking about especially, specifically with his disciples. And he says, I am the shepherd, you are the sheep. My sheep who know me know my voice, and they follow me. And then he goes into the passage, and I have come to give you life and life more abundantly. So Jesus is giving us this metaphor of the shepherd and the sheep, not just hearing his voice, but following closely. Over this past week, my family and I, we went up to Mentone just for a night, stay at a little tiny house up there and do some hiking and enjoying it. It was really beautiful. It was really foggy up on the mountain, a really nice little getaway. And we love hiking. That's something we do a lot in our family. We always take a couple of weeks over the course of the year and go hiking different places. And my youngest, Nora, has pretty much her whole life has grown up with us hiking. And while we were hiking on this really narrow path, and there's a pretty big drop, 150, 200 feet drop off the side. And I mean, one step, and I mean, it's over, okay? And my little 9-year-old is walking this, with no real worry. And at one point in the hike, and this is not some funny preacher story, okay? This is for real. This happened like 5 days ago. She stopped and she said, you know what I do? She said, I step in mommy's footprints, because if I step in mommy's footprints, I know that I won't slip and fall. And I thought, man, that's some wisdom. That is really, really good. If I step in mommy's footprints, I follow mommy really closely because I know if I step in mommy's footprints, I won't slip and fall. It made me think of this passage, this John 10:10, where he's talking about, I am the shepherd, you are the sheep. Hear my voice and follow closely. This idea that Jesus is giving us is a life where it's not just that we hear and get some cognitive knowledge about who he is or what he did, but it's about following him in life and following him closely. We didn't give Nora a master class in mountain climbing, right? We didn't go through and explain all the dynamics of slippery surfaces and if you fall from this feet. We didn't do that. She intuited that if I follow mommy closely, if I step in her footprints, then I'll be okay. There's a word that you probably are familiar with that we find in the New Testament. It's funny because it's a Hebrew word that's not in the Old Testament, not in the Hebrew Bible. It's a word we only find in the New Testament. And it's a word that you know, and it's the word rabbi. And you probably know that word, and you probably have heard that word translated as teacher. And that's a really poor translation of the word rabbi. And the reason why is because it's a Hebrew word. There's no English word, okay? That is the actual Hebrew translation, the Hebrew phonics, okay? Rabbi. The reason why it's a poor translation is because we don't have a word that matches it, okay? The closest word the closest kind of single word that we use is teacher. And the reason why it's a bad translation is because in our culture, the idea of the teacher is an exchange-based relationship. I sit in front of the teacher, and the teacher gives me knowledge, okay? It's an acquisition and exchange of knowledge. That is not what the rabbi role was about, okay? It wasn't that kind of teacher. It mirrored much more what my daughter said about my wife. The role of the rabbi was that the student would follow closely in the footsteps of the rabbi, both physically and metaphorically. If the rabbi ate this, then I will eat this. If my rabbi does this, then I will do this. How my rabbi treats that poor person is how I will treat that poor person. It wasn't that they would show up Monday through Friday at 8 a.m., hear the rabbi's teachings, put them in their brain, then go home and go about their merry way. They followed closely in the steps of the rabbi. The word rabbi actually translates, it was a way of addressing that person. It meant my master. Not teacher, my master. The one who controls what I do. So when we think of Jesus as the rabbi, when Jesus tells us, I've come to give you a life and life more abundant, then maybe it's not that we should focus on just learning the teachings. Because I don't know if you're like me, but I know a lot of people who can quote Bible verses who are really hateful, foul people who don't look anything like Jesus, right? Anybody in the room on that? Yeah, me too, right? So it's not just about the knowledge. It's about how closely are we walking in those footsteps. So this morning, I just want to spend a few minutes looking at three non-teaching observations of Jesus. And what I mean by non-teaching is, I'm not going to go through and take a passage and dissect the passage for you. Okay, that's head knowledge. What I want to do is look at some of these overarching rhythms that we see in Jesus' life. Some of these overarching practices that one verse doesn't encapsulate it, but if you look at the Gospels, you see this over and over and over again. So maybe, as we're thinking on this time where we're looking ahead and looking back, maybe we can look at our year a little differently. The first non-teaching observation of Jesus' life that I want us to look at is this idea of rest, of Sabbath. You know, Jesus doesn't teach a ton on Sabbath, but he practiced it every week. As a good Jew in the first century, we know that he practiced Sabbath. That's what you did. It was one of the defining qualities of being a Jew in the first century. You see, some scholars, a lot of scholars, will say that the practice of Sabbath was the very first thing that distinguished the Israelites from the Egyptians. It was the very first marker that said, we're different. Sabbath and rest. You see, because they were enslaved in an economy where people's value, the Egyptians' value, was based on how much they produced. You see, the Egyptians worshiped gods that said, you have to produce in order to sacrifice. And if you couldn't sacrifice enough, then your value was lowered. God said very early on, I want you to rest on the seventh day because I rested on the seventh day. Your value will not be based on what you produce. Your value is based in me alone, and I call you worthy. And so no matter what you do, good or bad, you will never drop below the baseline of worthy and good. So one of the very first defining characteristics of these people were that they rested. So as I'm thinking about following in the steps of my rabbi, what does it look like for me to rest, to take Sabbath, to slow down and remember that my value is never based on what I produce? What does it look like to create more margin in my life? What does it look like to create more margin in your life? And to remember that your value is not based on what you do. I heard I was reading an article one time, not long ago, about the artist and sculptor Michelangelo. And it talked about how a true sculptor will sit and look at a piece of marble, a giant piece of marble. And a true sculptor will not ask the question, what can I create? A true sculptor will look at the piece of marble and they see what's already on the inside. And I heard this quote said that the sculptor just removes the excess. It just takes away the excess to reveal the beauty that was already there. What if we thought about margin in our lives as removing the excess to let the beauty show forth, the beauty that was already there, to give us some margin, to give us some space, remove the things that don't belong so that the goodness can shine through. When I think about those non-teachable or non-teaching observations of Jesus' life, rest and Sabbath is the first one. The second one is this idea of seeing and experiencing the world on a deeper level. You see, in the Gospels, we see Jesus walking around and he teaches all the way through the Gospels. And one of his primary ways that he teaches, one of his primary modes that he teaches in is by using this thing called parables. And we know that a parable is just a story that has a deeper meaning. It's taking observations, taking normal things and making them abnormal. He used metaphor a lot, but parable was sort of his go-to way of teaching. What if parables were not something that Jesus just said, hey, I want to teach you this lesson through this parable? What if parables were just his natural way of seeing the world? Here's what I mean by that. When Jesus saw a sparrow, he didn't just think, that's a bird. Maybe he saw it and immediately thought, I can understand God's faithfulness to me by how God takes care of that sparrow, and knowing that if God takes care of that sparrow, God will take care of me. And if God takes care of that sparrow and that sparrow doesn't wander around worrying, then maybe I shouldn't worry either. Maybe Jesus saw the world in a deeper way, underneath the surface of a tiny mustard seed. And instead of just seeing a seed that would produce a plant, maybe he saw it as, man, with God, if I have faith just as big as this, through God, I can move mountains. What if he wasn't trying to come up with great sermon illustrations? What if that's just how he saw the world? What if everything had meaning? What if everything was teaching him a lesson? I believe that's the case. I believe that when Jesus saw wineskins, he understood grace, he understood growth. I believe that when Jesus heard about his neighbor who was a rich man and his son took his inheritance and ran away and blew it all and came back a few months later and he was deadbeat and he was poor, he didn't have anything. He came back groveling just to be able to let back into the house as a servant, and his neighbor let him back in, and not only let him back in, but wrapped his robe around him, put his ring on him, and threw a party for him. What if Jesus, because here's the thing, if that's my neighbor, I'm not thinking, look at God. Look at God. Wow. I'm thinking, that guy's an idiot, right? He's just abusing you. He's going to take your money again, right? But Jesus said, Jesus' life shows that he's not looking at that surface level. He's getting beneath. He's seeing what one theologian, a guy named Rabbi, calls the base notes. It's those things below the surface, those things you have to really listen for. You can kind of feel them, but you have to pay attention. I believe that when Jesus was teaching in parables, I don't think he was just trying to use some device to help us understand something better. I think he was showing us the way he actually saw the world. And I don't think that way of seeing the world is unavailable to us. I think it's available to each of us, where we see deeper meaning. We don't just experience the world on the surface, but we go deeper, and we realize that there's so much more at work than what we see on the surface level. The last thing that I'll say is sort of a non-teaching observation about Jesus' life is that he gave himself to something bigger. He gave himself to something much bigger than his moment. He gave himself to a cause. He gave himself to a mission. He gave himself to his friends, his family. He gave himself to the world that surrounded him. What if instead of getting caught up in the minutia and the petty things, what if we had a bigger vision of this life that we get to live? What if instead of worrying about all the little things, getting all amped up, getting all worried, what if we just took a step back and kind of defocused? See the bigger picture. You see, Jesus got in a lot of trouble with this group called the Pharisees because part of the Pharisees' MO were they paid attention to the minutia. They paid attention to every little detail. And Jesus constantly said, well, I get that, but let's step back and see the bigger picture. I'll tell you one thing, if we were to do this, if we were to give ourselves to something bigger, I guarantee you one thing would happen. Our blood pressure would go down. We wouldn't be nearly as stressed out. We wouldn't have nearly as many heart attacks and strokes. We'd be much nicer moms and dads. We'd be much better behaved sons and daughters. We would be better neighbors and friends. And when we looked at ourselves in the mirror, I guarantee you we would like what we saw. Because it's not about this little petty stuff. It's about something much bigger and much more beautiful. What if we gave ourselves to our priorities and our values? What if we fully gave ourselves to our friends and our family and not these devices that hold our attention, but we were where our feet are. We're fully present. And we saw the world through a much bigger and more beautiful lens. Now here's the thing. None of these non-teachable or non-teaching observations, they don't have like a verse that you can, ping with it. These are overarching understandings of the life that Jesus lived and the work that he did. We have an opportunity not to get stressed out at this time of year where we look back at 365 days of regret and forward at 365 days of hopeful anxiety, but we have the opportunity to focus on the things that are around us, to look deeper, to rest, to slow down. I want to close this morning with two quotes. Two quotes I think sum this up in a really beautiful way. The first one is from a 20th century theologian named Howard Thurman. And when asked about the good life, here's what Howard Thurman said. This good life is not a splendid, autonomous isolation, but a mutual, accountable participation in the lives of others. It's not a splendid, autonomous isolation, but a mutual, accountable participation in the lives of others. We get so wrapped up in our lives that we forget that we're a part of something so much bigger. We get so wrapped up in our goals and our resolutions and the way I want to improve my little 2 foot by 2 foot space that I occupy, that we forget that there's an entire world of beauty and goodness out there that we get to be a part of. And it's not autonomous. It's not about isolation. It's about this interwoven web that's pulsing with life and humanity and goodness. The second quote that I'll close us with is from the Dalai Lama. A couple weeks ago, Archbishop Desmond Tutu passed away, an incredibly prolific figure, brought so much goodness to this world, so much insight to this world. And I don't know if you know this, but one of his very best friends in the whole world was the Dalai Lama. They used to go around speaking together. They wrote a book together. Just a really beautiful relationship. And I went and saw the Dalai Lama a few years ago and heard him teach, and absolutely fabulous. And while I was there, I bought the scroll that it hangs beside my computer in my office at my house. And here's what the scroll says. We are visitors on this planet. We're here for 90 or 100 years at the very most. During that period, we must try to do something good, something useful with our lives. If you contribute to other people's happiness, you will find the true goal, the true meaning of life. I love that quote so much. It simplifies it. It pulls it back. It's almost kind of like what Jesus did when they said, well, so tell us about the commandments. He said, well, there's really two. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus took 400 and some odd laws and he broke it down into two things. Love God and love each other. So as we're thinking about this precipice of the new year, here's what I want to challenge you with. Take a step back. Take a breather. Rest a little bit. Look beyond the surface. Get below the anxiety. Get below the ripples of the water and look deep. See the world through a deeper lens. And give yourself to something bigger. I promise you, it'll work out a heck of a lot better than these resolutions we're going to be giving up in 2 months anyways. And that's my hope for you. That's my hope for me. I told somebody after the first service, I said, they're like, oh, that stepped on all my toes in all the right ways. I said, well, listen, I'm stepping on mine as I stand up here the whole time, okay? I'm preaching to myself. But maybe, just maybe, we can do this if we do it together. Let's pray. God, we thank you for your love and your grace. God, we thank you that you call us to something bigger than ourselves. God, we thank you that you give us rest, that you give us the ability to see the world as you see it. God, help us to slow down. Help us to take a big breath, a deep breath. Help us to be with the people we're with. Help us to pull those around us a little closer, to hold them a little longer. At most, we have 90 to 100 years. God, help us to live the good life, the life more abundant. And God, let us do that by following closely in the footsteps of our Rabbi, Jesus Christ. Amen.